Standing before the mirror, George adjusted his shirt and belt to form a perfect line with the zipper cover of his pants. It was something he learned as a young man in the Army, and the habit stayed with him. The line was called a gig line, and if it was not exact, as measured by the edge of a steel ruler, the inspecting officer would firmly grasp the shirt tails of the offending soldier and rip them out of place. Occasionally, in their haste, the inspecting officer would also grab the offender's underwear waistband, resulting in a painful reminder to conform to standards. George never had his shirt tails pulled free, but knew others who had. For him, it was easy to make sure things were as they were supposed to be, as he thrived on consistency. As long as he knew what to expect and what was expected of him, he was happy. It was on those rare occasions when life wandered into the gray area that he became uncomfortable. Perhaps he was too self-conscious for his own good, but it worked for him. As a boy, he felt ashamed when corrected, as if he should have known that what he was doing was not proper. Life was full of rules, and he found if he followed the rules, he felt good about himself. Sometimes he wanted to break the rules, just a little bit, to satisfy some urge deep inside, but he repressed these feelings from fear he would be corrected. On those occasions that he did go ahead and stretch things, as he liked to call it, the guilt he felt afterward always outweighed the pleasure of the act. He brushed his hair, and after laying the brush in its proper place on the counter, checked his collar to make sure it was laying evenly on both sides. He was also listening for the sound of the train whistle at the crossing up the street. Each morning, as he finished preparing for work, the train would come through town and blow its whistle long and hard just before reaching the crossing. This was George's cue that he should be finished preparing for the day and headed into the kitchen to make his coffee. It was a ritual he had developed over the years. Each morning he left his bathroom at the sound of the train whistle and went to the kitchen. By the time he was finished making his traveler cup of coffee, he could hear the train whistle again as it blew at the crossing 3 miles up the track. It was his signal to grab his sack lunch, go out to the car, and head for work, as the train had passed and the intersection would be free of traffic. Leaving early for work would do no good unless he left at least 15 minutes ahead of schedule, because he would invariably end up sitting and watching the train pass. Leaving early was the one thing he did not feel bad about stretching, because sometimes he felt the urge to watch the train pass. He liked to watch the powerful diesel engines pulling boxcars, tank cars, and open carrier cars loaded with coal or grain. Often, there was graffiti painted on the side of the cars, and he wondered about the kids who put it there. What was their town like, and why did they feel it necessary to spray paint trains? Some of their graffiti was worthy of praise as art. It was a simple pleasure he allowed himself only 2 or 3 times a year because it always stirred up the burning question. Where did the train go when it left his little country community? The question itself was not so bad, but rather his thoughts in the hours that followed. It never failed to spark his imagination, wondering where the train went, and on several occasions it had resulted in hard feelings because his wandering mind slowed his work at the garage. So, he made sure to plan his train-watching days for times when work at the shop was slow. Then, he could sit and clean his tools or sweep the garage floor while his mind wandered at will without worrying he was holding up a customer. Where did the train go? He asked his reflection in the mirror silently as he combed his beard and mustache. There was more gray than black in his hair now, and he was what some would call salt and pepper. He liked that. It was a kind way of saying he was seasoned. Well seasoned, actually, as he was due to retire in a few weeks. Not that he wanted to. He loved working on cars in the garage, but his old friend who owned the place passed on the year before, and his wife sold the garage to a corporation from the big city. As often happens, as he'd come to learn by reading the newspaper and watching the news on television, the new owners wanted to improve productivity. This meant he was going to be replaced by a younger man with more energy and the ability to fix a few more cars per day than his old hands would allow. He was put on notice about a month ago, and told he would be given a pension to help supplement his Social Security, and his health insurance would be continued. It wasn't a bad deal, really. He would still get enough money to live on each month, as he had for the last 35 years, but he had no idea what he would do with his time. What was there for an old man to do in a small rural town with no job? It would be different if his wife were still alive, but she had passed on several years before, and he had no children. Just a small house on a small lot in the middle of a small town that rolled up the sidewalks and changed the single stoplight to flash alternately red and yellow when the sun went down. George pressed the name tag on his shirt flat and flicked an imaginary mote of dust from it. He was proud of the white oval badge with his name in blue script over his pocket. Under his name, the word certified mechanic attested to his abilities with cars. Over the other pocket was a tag with the company name and logo, same as it had been since he was a boy. It was a good shop, and had been serving the community since cars became the way of life back in the early 1900s. He smiled at himself as he realized he was waiting to hear the train whistle. But he would not hear the whistle from his bathroom this morning. He looked at his watch. In fact, the whistle was not due to be heard for at least another hour. Today, he was stretching things a bit, as he had several days ago when the burning question captured his mind again. He was so moved by the question this time, though, that when he left the garage last night, he put his favorite set of wrenches and a few other hand tools into a small black kit bag and brought them home. Going to the kitchen, he turned off the coffee pot and made his traveler cup. Then he poured the rest of the pot into a thermos and added cream and sugar. He set this on the table next to his sack lunch and the black kit bag with his tools. Also in the bag were 2 changes of his work uniform, clean underwear, socks, and a small shaving kit. He looked them over once and turned to walk the house, making sure all the lights were turned off. Finally, he unplugged the toaster and coffee pot, tucked his lunch and thermos into the black bag, and grabbed his coffee. He was ready. It was still dark outside, and he had to reach back in to turn the porch light off as he closed and locked the back door. Today, his car would remain in the garage, and he left the keys hanging inside next to the back door. He only needed his house key, and this he put in the tab inside his wallet with his check card and the small amount of cash that he carried daily. When he stepped off the porch, he felt oddly free. Despite his age, he found it hard to not run as he walked down the sidewalk toward the intersection. He was excited and felt more alive than he had in years. It was as if he was setting off on some long-anticipated adventure. After crossing the intersection, he turned to the right and walked down the railroad tracks until he was about 100 yards into the woods on either side. He found a likely stump and sat down to wait. A whippoorwill called out to the morning as he felt a slight rumbling beneath his feet. Rocks amidst the railroad tracks began to vibrate and dance as the sound of the train whistle blew long and hard. It was much louder than he had ever heard it before, and he had to cover his ears with his hands to protect them. The thrumming of the heavy diesel engines pounded closer and closer until he could feel their rhythm in his chest like the beat of a bass drum, and suddenly the train was before him, roaring past. He threw a wave to the engineer and watched as the engine faded from view around the bend. A long line of tank cars marched slowly past, and he saw the beginning of the boxcars. Standing up, he slipped his arms into the handles of the black bag to wear it like a backpack and walked closer to the train. He could feel the air rushing under the cars and hear the steady clank, 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 clank of the steel wheels as they rolled over a joint in the track near him. It was moving much faster than he had realized from watching in his car, and he began to doubt his plan. He banished the thought. He had waited too long to answer the burning question, and now it was do or die trying because he had to know. He spotted an open boxcar coming and began to run beside the train. As the open car came next to him, he lunged for the door and grabbed at a handhold. His feet slipped out from under him as he tried to pull himself onto the roaring train, and for a moment he thought all was lost. Summoning every ounce of strength he could muster, He pulled himself up the door and swung a leg into the car. With a quick twist, he flung the other leg over and rolled safely into the boxcar. Laying there panting from exertion, he could feel his heart pounding and smiled. He'd done it. He was on the train. The whistle began to blow long and hard as he caught his breath and realized they were already at the crossing 3 miles from where he normally watched the train. He sat up quickly and moved over by the door to look out. He did not want to miss a moment of this ride. After a bit, the train passed through a neighboring town, and George looked at the people sitting in their cars waiting for the train to pass so they could get on with their day. He spotted a young man watching the train and was reminded of himself many years before as he saw the man mouth the words, "I wonder where that train is going." Forest faded to farm fields, which rolled gently to hills as they approached the mountains. Entering the trees once again, George reached into his bag and got out his traveler of coffee and a sandwich. He wondered what the guys at the garage must be thinking now. He had not missed a day of work in 35 years, and suddenly, today, he would not be there. That was okay. They would not miss him as there was not much work and the floors did not need sweeping. He watched the sun climb higher over the mountains and sat back to enjoy his coffee. He watched as birds soared over the forest and deer grazed casually next to the tracks, paying no mind to the steel monster roaring past them. He was free, and felt content in knowing that he would soon know the answer to the burning question. He dozed off, wondering what it would be like where he was going. George woke to the sound of screeching steel as the train came to a stop. Looking out the door, he was greeted by fields of amber waves surrounding a small town, and there was a man standing near the track, looking at him. "Hello, George," he said. "We've been waiting for you." George smiled and grabbed his bag. As he let himself off the train, he looked around and was amazed at how beautiful the area was. "Oh, you brought your tools," the man said, reaching out to shake his hand. "That's good. We can always use a good mechanic." Falling into step beside the man, he turned his face to the sun and relished the warm glow as they walked into the field toward town. A light breeze blowing across the wheat brought the smell of fresh-baked apple pie to his nose, and it reminded him of the pies his wife used to bake. Hearing a voice behind him, he turned to see 2 men looking into the boxcar he had just left. "Hey, buddy, come on, you can't be in there," the engineer said upon finding George asleep in a boxcar. His assistant jumped up to wake the old man and tell him to leave, but stopped and turned back to the engineer. "That's odd." "What's odd?" the engineer asked. "Old fella passed on in his sleep, but he's smiling." Hello all, SK South here. I hope you enjoyed this short story. It's one from a new collection I'm working on and hope to publish next year. If you're interested in reading my books, I've put a link to my Amazon listings down below. I'll be publishing more of my original short stories in the near future from a variety of genres, so if you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe and be sure to hit the bell icon so you'll be notified when I publish again. For those ever so patiently following the boat build, I am just about finished with the build and have been stockpiling the footage. My next release on the Express build will be a full start to completion video, and depending on interest shown, plan to follow that with a shorter step-by-step build video from beginning to end. SK South out.